Pennsylvania, January 2021. Two detectives sit across from a man named Harold Holman. He has already confessed to 2 murders, 2 women, 2 separate cases in Pennsylvania. The detectives think they understand exactly who they are dealing with. Then Holman leans forward and says something that stops everything. He wants to know if all 3 cases can be combined. He doesn't want 3 separate trials. The room goes still. 3 cases. There is no 3rd case on that table. There is no 3rd file. The detectives haven't mentioned another victim. They haven't hinted at one. There is nothing in that room that should have produced a 3rd number. One detective looks at the other. Then Holman says a name, Ashley Parlier. Nobody in that room knows who she is. They write the name down and the interrogation shifts direction entirely because a man who just confessed to 2 murders has now volunteered a 3rd, unprompted, unasked, of his own free will. 400 miles away, a phone is about to ring in Michigan, and an 18-year-old case that had gone completely cold is about to crack open. She didn't disappear. She was taken. And the man who took her told the world himself. Bedford Township sits on the quieter edge of Battle Creek, Michigan. Modest streets, familiar faces. The kind of neighborhood where a screen door slamming at 7 in the morning means someone's already heading to work, and where people notice when something feels off. Ashley Marie Parlier grew up there. Second child of Russell and Cherie Parlier. She graduated from Battle Creek Central High School. Not easily, but she did it. She got a job at the Taco Bell on Northeast Capitol Avenue. She saved her paychecks with a specific goal in mind. A car. Her own car. So she wouldn't need to depend on anyone else to get where she needed to go. Small goal. Real one. The kind of goal that tells you exactly who a person is. Here is what you need to understand about Ashley before anything else in this story makes sense. She had a mild intellectual disability, not visible from across a room. Not the kind that stopped her from working or graduating or building a routine. But real, meaning that, at 21 years old, she processed the world emotionally the way a 12 or 13-year-old would. The instincts that most adults develop over time, the radar that fires when a situation starts to feel wrong, when someone's kindness has a motive behind it, when a friendly face is performing rather than feeling. Those instincts weren't fully formed in her. Her sister, Nicole Campen, said it this way. If you were nice to her, she just assumed you were a nice person. She didn't really get that there could be evil. That wasn't carelessness. That wasn't stupidity. That was Ashley's nature. Open, warm, and completely unequipped for the specific kind of person who looks for exactly that quality in someone. She would give a stranger her last dollar if they said they were hungry. She would walk into a room full of people she didn't know and assume genuinely that they all meant well. That light in her, that was what made her Ashley. It was also what made her a target. June 12, 2005 began like any other morning in the Parlier house. Then it didn't. Ashley's parents looked at their daughter, really looked, and they saw something that changed the atmosphere of that house within minutes. They believed she was pregnant. And what followed wasn't a small disagreement about weekend plans. It was a serious, frightened argument between 2 parents who understood something their daughter didn't fully grasp. She was 21 years old with the emotional processing of a young teenager. She was pregnant. And based on everything they knew about their daughter, her trust, her openness, her inability to recognize manipulation, they were terrified about what that meant and how it had happened. They wanted her to see a doctor, get prenatal care, face the situation with help around her. Ashley felt cornered. She was overwhelmed in the way that only happens when the people you love are asking you to do something your mind isn't ready to process. And she did what overwhelmed people do. She left. She walked out that front door in a checkered shirt, blue jeans, and brown leather sandals. She took roughly $700 in cash, everything she had saved from her Taco Bell paychecks. No cell phone, no credit card, no driver's license, no car. When she walked out that door, she was a striking figure, nearly 5'9", barely 100 pounds. A girl who looked like a woman but processed the world like a child. And she was walking into it completely alone, with $700 and nowhere specific to go. Her family wasn't panicking yet. They knew Ashley. She needed space to decompress. She'd go to a friend's place, calm down, and come home by the weekend. They gave her that room. The weekend came. Ashley didn't come home. Now the calls started. Friends, acquaintances, anyone Ashley might have reached out to, nothing. No trace of her anywhere. No contact, no sighting, no word. The family filed a missing persons report. Police released Ashley's photo and physical description. Tips arrived almost immediately. multiple people reporting a young woman matching Ashley near Houghton Lake, 2 hours north of Battle Creek. The family exhaled for the first time in days. Every single sighting fell apart. Wrong timing, wrong details, none confirmed. Ashley wasn't near Houghton Lake. She wasn't anywhere anyone could find. Here is where the investigation took a turn that would define the next 16 years of the Parlier family's life. With no evidence of a crime and no confirmed sightings, detectives did what investigators always do. They started with the people who last saw her. Russell Parlier had been one of the last people with Ashley before she disappeared. He agreed to take a polygraph test. He passed. Cherie Parlier declined. She had her reasons the family understood, but the town didn't. Cherie was already in the early stages of Huntington's disease, a devastating neurological condition that attacks the brain over years. Her judgment, her emotional regulation, her ability to handle high-pressure situations, all of it was already quietly deteriorating. She declined the test. And in a small town where Ashley's disappearance had become the subject of constant conversation, that decision cast a shadow. Not an accusation, just a shadow. The kind that follows a family into grocery stores and church pews and school pickups. The kind that doesn't need words because the silence between people carries it. Nicole Campen watched her parents live under that shadow for 15 years. Investigators also located Ashley's ex-boyfriend, the man they believed was connected to the pregnancy. He cooperated fully. He had moved on, had another pregnant girlfriend at the time. No evidence connected him to Ashley's disappearance. He wasn't charged. Friends were questioned. Every thread was pulled. Nothing held. $700 in cash can last a few weeks if you're careful. It can cover a motel room and some meals and a bus ticket somewhere. But it isn't a new life. It has an expiration date. And as weeks turned into months with no activity on Ashley's social security number, no confirmed sightings, no contact of any kind, investigators told the Parlier family what they had come to believe. Ashley was likely dead. They didn't have a suspect. They didn't have evidence. They didn't have a body. But the case, officially, had entered the territory of suspected foul play. Multiple detectives cycled through the case over the following years. The Battle Creek Police Department worked it. In 2020, it was transferred to the Calhoun County Sheriff's Department, when investigators suspected the crime may have occurred outside city limits. Detectives traveled to California, to Maryland, to Pennsylvania. They interviewed dozens of people, friends, acquaintances, dating interests, anyone who had crossed paths with Ashley in the years before she disappeared. Russell and Cherie Parlier died in the spring of 2020, both of them. Within the same season, they had spent 15 years carrying their daughter's disappearance, alongside a quiet community suspicion that was never confirmed and never fully lifted. They died not knowing. The case transfer to the sheriff's department happened after they were already gone. The warrant, the breakthrough, the name, all of it came after. Nicole Campen would later say, "I wish my parents could be alive to hear this news." 7 words that hold everything. But here is what the police didn't know while they were looking at the family and the ex-boyfriend and the friends. While every investigation pointed in the wrong direction, one man in Battle Creek was living his life completely undisturbed. He drove his truck routes. He kept his schedule. He had already killed once before on another continent. And he knew something that Ashley's family was still desperately hoping wasn't true. He knew exactly where she was. The man who walked into Ashley's life wasn't a stranger to the dark. He had already left a body in the soil of another continent. Harold David Holman III didn't become a killer in Michigan. He arrived there already tested, already knowing, from deliberate personal experience, that he was capable of ending a human life and living with it afterward. To understand what Ashley walked into that night, you have to understand what Holman already was before she ever met him. He was born in 1978 in Michigan. In the mid-1990s, his family relocated to Ramstein-Miesenbach, a small German town built in the shadow of one of the largest American military installations in the world, Ramstein Air Base. His father worked there as a civilian technician, stable job, government contract, the kind of life that looks structured from the outside. Then his father got into an argument with him, packed up, and left for Turkey. Gone. His girlfriend took him in for a while. Then that relationship ended too. And when she asked him to leave, there was nowhere to go. So he went into the woods. Not a shelter, not a couch somewhere. The actual woods, the strip of dense forest running between Ramstein Village and the base perimeter, He dug himself into the earth. A dugout. A pit, reinforced with branches and whatever materials he could scavenge. Damp walls pressing in from every side. The smell of pine rot and cold mud. Above him, American military jets cut across the sky at irregular intervals, their engines shaking the air over a base full of order and structure and purpose. He lived in a hole beneath all of it. Months passed like that, surviving on odd jobs, petty theft, no accountability to anyone, no one watching. The rules of normal social life stop applying when you remove yourself entirely from it. Something colder fills the space. Something that asks questions a person embedded in community would never ask. What would it actually feel like? Joseph Lawrence Whitehurst went by Jay. He was 21, son of an Air Force colonel stationed at Ramstein, the kind of young American who ended up at the same local bars as the drifter living in the woods near the base perimeter. They had crossed paths before. Casual acquaintances in a small expat world where everyone eventually ends up in the same handful of places. On the night of May 29, 1999, they drank together. The next morning, they walked into a park near the base. They lit a campfire. And at some point in the early hours of May 30, something shifted. Jay Whitehurst, drunk, started moving around the fire. Dancing, maybe. Running in loose circles the way people do when the alcohol hasn't worn off and the night feels like it's still going, uninhibited, joyful even. Hallman told a German court that this movement made him feel threatened, that he acted in self-defense, that the attack was reactive. That was a lie. He admitted it himself years later in an American interrogation room. I killed him just to see what it would feel like. Not rage, not fear. Not a fight that escalated beyond control. A decision. A deliberate choice to cross the distance between them, raise a club, and bring it down on another human being's skull, for the purpose of answering a question he had been carrying alone in that dugout for months. Jay Whitehurst dropped. Hallman covered the body with leaves and walked away. 3 days later, someone found Jay near the base. Hallman wasn't caught for the murder. He was arrested weeks later on a completely unrelated petty theft charge and then, in the middle of that interrogation, volunteered the confession. Nobody asked. Nobody was pushing him toward it. He just told them. That pattern, the unprompted confession, the voluntary revelation, would repeat itself 22 years later in a Pennsylvania interrogation room. It is not a coincidence. It is a characteristic. Hallman needed, on some level, for people to know what he had done. German courts have a specific provision for offenders under 21, tried as juveniles. Maximum sentence, even for the most serious offenses, capped at 10 years. Hallman received a psychiatric evaluation that identified early symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia, legally sane, but mentally compromised enough for the court to show leniency. The Zweibrücken court sentenced him to 6 years in a German reform school. He served 3 years for a life. And then he was released, deported, and returned to the United States. A convicted killer whose criminal record did not transfer across the border in any meaningful way that would flag him to American law enforcement. He arrived back in Michigan. He had relatives in Battle Creek. He found a room. He got a job as a truck driver. Long hours, open highways, no one looking too closely at where he'd been or what he'd done before he got here. 3 years for a life. A bargain that would eventually cost Ashley Parlier everything. Somewhere in that same city, Ashley was working her Taco Bell shifts, saving toward her car, moving through the world with that open-hearted assumption that the people around her were fundamentally good. The exact details of how they met aren't fully documented. What court records establish is that Hallman was living in the Battle Creek area between 2002 and 2009, that he came into contact with Ashley during that period, and that a relationship of some kind developed. To Ashley, with her nature, her trust, her inability to read what lived behind a friendly face, he was just a person who was kind to her, a man with a car and a place to be. Someone who seemed interested in her at a time when she was still figuring out who she was. She didn't know about Germany. She couldn't have. On the night of June 12, 2005, the same night she walked out of her parents' house, Ashley went to Hallman's home in Emmett Township. She needed somewhere to go, someone to talk to. She was overwhelmed and pregnant and had just walked away from the biggest argument of her life. She went to him because she trusted him. That trust killed her. She told him about the pregnancy, about the fight with her parents. Hallman later told investigators that he believed he was the father. What followed was another argument. The details exist only in his own account, which he controlled and shaped. What he told detectives was this: he assaulted her, knocked her unconscious, put her in the back of his car. Then he drove south. Newton Township sits a few miles below Battle Creek. Remote fields, sparse trees, farmland that in 2005 had almost no residential development for stretches. He pulled off somewhere along a road he would later struggle to identify again. He cut the engine. Sat in the dark. Ashley was unconscious in the back seat. No cars passed. The field around him was completely silent. He thought about it, his own words, and the longer he sat there, the more the silence felt like an answer. In his own statement, "The longer I sat there, the more I thought, this is as good a place as any." He took her out of the car, struck her several times with a piece of wood until she stopped moving. Then he drove home. Showered. The next day, he disposed of his blood-soaked clothes at the warehouse where he worked as if it were a routine errand. 2 months later, something pulled him back. He drove out to Newton Township and found the spot. Looked at what remained of Ashley Parlier. Only bones. He drove home again. And then he kept living. He left Battle Creek in 2009. Drifted through Pennsylvania, California, Illinois, Maryland. Got married to a woman named Ann in the early 2010s. A husband, a driver, a neighbor. Someone who paid rent and charged his phone and made normal conversation at the gas station. For 13 years after Ashley, the monster stayed quiet. But silence isn't the same as stillness, and the thing that had driven him into that field in Newton Township hadn't gone anywhere. It had just gone dormant. The world was changing around him. Smartphones. Social media. Dating apps connecting millions of strangers with nothing more than a profile and a name. He made a profile. He needed a name. He chose the most forgettable one he could think of. Dave. Before we continue, if this story is hitting you, hit that subscribe button right now. We're a small team, and we put weeks of research into every single case we bring you. It costs you nothing but means everything to us. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We read every single one. Now back to the case. Dave is such a plain, safe name. Not threatening, not memorable. The guy from accounting. Your neighbor's cousin. Someone you'd pass in a hallway and forget by the time you reach the end of it. That was the point. Harold Holman had spent years studying what kind of person he was drawn to. Women who were kind, trusting, slightly isolated, looking for connection badly enough that they wouldn't question a man who seemed genuinely interested in them. He wasn't dating. He was selecting. His marriage to Anne had fallen apart in 2013. She had refused to participate in his sexual fantasies, bondage, control, dominance. When she said no and held that line, the marriage ended. But what that refusal also did was confirm something Holman had understood about himself since Germany. He needed to own people. When conventional life wouldn't give him that, he went looking in the margins. He found dating apps, Meet Me, Scout, Facebook. Platforms where a man named Dave, with a basic profile and a patient approach, could build something that looked like trust before it became something else entirely. The FBI would later note that he was not hunting randomly. He was hunting specifically, looking for the same wiring he had found in Ashley. Women who were vulnerable in ways that weren't immediately visible. Women whose need for connection outpaced their instinct for caution. For 13 years after Newton Township, Harold Holman was a ghost. But ghosts eventually need to leave a footprint. Tiana Phillips was 25, a mother of 2. She had a life with weight and texture and people who depended on her. On the night of June 13, 2018, she told a friend that Dave was coming to pick her up. She'd had an argument with her boyfriend. She needed to get out for a while. Dave had offered. She got in the car. Holman drove her to Hobby Road in Butler Township, Pennsylvania, a remote stretch of woods off the interstate, the kind of place that doesn't appear on most people's mental maps of the area. He killed her there, bludgeoned and stabbed her, and left her in those woods. Then he drove home and told his wife. Not because guilt was eating him alive, not because he was falling apart. He told Anne what he had done with a specific intention. He wanted her to know, wanted someone to witness it, wanted the act acknowledged by at least one other person on Earth. In September 2018, 3 months after Tiana's death, he drove Anne to Hobby Road. She sat in the car. He walked into the woods with a trash bag. He came back 20 minutes later with Phillips's skull, clothing, and skeletal remains. They drove to an AMC movie theater in Scott Township, and he dumped everything in the dumpsters behind the building. He showed Anne the photographs he had taken of the body. She said nothing to police. Don't rush past that. Sit with it for a moment. Not to judge her, but to understand what it means to wake up one morning and fully comprehend that the man in your house has killed someone, has shown you the evidence, has taken you to the place where it happened. That the thing protecting you from becoming a name in a missing persons report is his current decision not to add you to the list. Anne stayed silent for 2 years. December 2020. Erica Schultz was 26 and autistic, a woman of deep routine. The same job at a local grocery store, the same apartment in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, the same predictable schedule that her family had come to rely on as proof that she was okay. She had been talking to someone named Dave online. Her sister Emily warned her to be careful. A friend asked Erica to install a tracking app on her phone. Erica had even mentioned to this friend that Dave wanted her to pack everything up and go away with him. She got in the car on December 4th. Her phone traveled west along I-80. Cell tower to cell tower, the records would later show, with Holman's phone right beside it the entire way. Then in the early hours of December 6th, Erica's phone went dark. It never connected to another tower. He drove her to the same stretch of woods on Hobby Road where Tiana Phillips had died 2 years earlier. He struck her 12 times in the head with a mallet-type hammer. She was still alive. He stabbed her 12 times with a kitchen knife. The number matters. This was not controlled. This was not the cold, patient calculation of Newton Township in 2005 or even the brutality of Hobby Road in 2018. 24 separate acts of violence against one person. The mask wasn't slipping anymore. It was gone. December 23rd. FBI agents show up at Holman's door. No arrest yet, no body recovered, no hard physical evidence in hand, but they install a GPS tracker on his van and schedule a follow-up interview for the next day. He doesn't show. He destroys his phone. Leaves. The GPS tracker follows him east across Pennsylvania. December 26th. The signal stops near Duncannon, a small borough along the Susquehanna River where almost nothing usually happens. Railroad tracks cut through the outskirts of town. A railroad worker finds a man lying near the tracks, wrists open, a box cutter on the ground nearby. Holman had sent Anne a text that morning. "I have made a decision that is just best for everyone." He wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to take everything he knew to the grave. Every name, every location, every patch of woods with a body in it. He wanted to close the book right there on those tracks. That railroad worker didn't just save a man's life. He saved the truth for 3 families who had been living without it. Holman was taken to Geisinger Holy Spirit Hospital in Camp Hill. Treated, stabilized. FBI agents walked back in. He confessed to Erica Schultz, pulled up Google Maps, the same app teenagers use for homework, and pointed to the exact coordinates of her body in the woods off Hobby Road. Investigators found her that same day. The Phillips confession followed. Anne came forward. She handed police a letter Holman had written her, a written confession to Tiana's murder, framed as a love letter. Proof, he wrote, that he would never do to Anne what he had done to Tiana. The letter that was meant to be a gesture of twisted devotion became the document that sealed his fate. 2 cases collapsed into guilty pleas. In August 2021, Holman took a plea deal in Luzerne County, 2 life sentences without parole in exchange for the prosecution dropping the death penalty. At sentencing, he sat through the entire proceeding without expression, no remorse. No address to the court. Complete equanimity, as if the proceedings had nothing to do with him. Then came January 2021. The interrogation room. 2 detectives. A table. A man who had already confessed to 2 murders and had, seemingly, nothing left to protect. Except one more name. Holman leaned forward and asked if all 3 cases could be combined. The pen stopped. Then he said, "Ashley Parlier." A phone rang in the Calhoun County Sheriff's Department in Michigan. Detective Jonathan Pignataro, who had been a young patrol deputy driving the same roads near Newton Township when Ashley first went missing 16 years earlier, picked up. He heard a name he hadn't spoken in years. The ghost of Ashley Parlier had finally found her voice. But finding her name and finding her, those turned out to be 2 very different things. He confessed. He pleaded guilty. He got sentenced. And Ashley Parlier still hasn't come home. July 2021. The murder warrant was issued in Michigan, and Calhoun County Sheriff Steve Hinckley stood in front of cameras and said the words that the Parlier family had been waiting 18 years to hear. After 16 years, Ashley Parlier's family can know that justice is near. Nicole Campen heard those words and felt something that didn't have a clean name, not celebration, not relief in the way relief is supposed to feel. Something closer to a door opening onto a room you've been locked out of for most of your adult life. And then realizing the room is empty in ways you hadn't prepared for. She said, We got our indictment. I wish my parents could be alive to hear this news. Russell and Ashley Parlier had died in the spring of 2020, both of them, within the same season. They had spent 15 years carrying Ashley's disappearance alongside a quiet community suspicion that was never confirmed and never fully lifted. The neighbors who looked at them differently, the silence in places where warmth used to be, the weight of being the last people to see their daughter alive and having that fact treated as something to explain. They died under that weight, still waiting for an answer that came 7 months too late. A victory doesn't feel like a victory when the people who fought for it the longest aren't there to see it. It feels like something else entirely, a cruelty dressed up as closure. There was one condition attached to Holman's Michigan plea deal. He would help detectives find Ashley. In June 2021, he was flown from Pennsylvania back to Michigan for the first time in years. Detectives drove him through Calhoun County, south toward Newton Township. Holman sat in the back of that car and looked out the window at land he hadn't seen since 2005. He couldn't find it. The roads looked wrong. The fields he remembered weren't there. The remote stretch of farmland where he had sat in silence with Ashley's unconscious body, overgrown, empty, no cars for an hour, didn't match anything visible from the window. Because it was gone. On March 30th, 2022, nearly 24 law enforcement officers searched a wooded area along 6.5-mile road in Newton Township. Hours of methodical searching across the ground where Holman believed he had left her. They found nothing. Here is what had happened to that land. In 2005, Newton Township in that stretch was open farmland. The kind of place that appears on no one's radar, no development, no traffic, no reason for anyone to be there after dark. But in the years that followed, that land was subdivided, parceled out, sold off to separate buyers. And those buyers built on it. Right now, somewhere in Newton Township, there may be a family living in a house on that ground. A kitchen, a living room, children's bedrooms. A normal, ordinary life being lived on top of a secret that has been there for 20 years. That is not a horror movie image. That is a documented, investigated reality. And Holman, the only person who knew the exact location, cannot find it anymore. The woods he trusted to keep his secret absorbed it so completely that even he has lost it. A killer who has lost his own grave. There is something almost biblical about that. The land itself refusing to give him the satisfaction of controlling even the location of what he did. Luzerne County Deputy District Attorney Dan Zola said something during the investigation that has not stopped being relevant. He pointed to the gaps. 1999 to 2005, 2005 to 2018. Those are long stretches of Harold Holman's life, where we have confirmed violence on both ends and almost nothing documented in between. The FBI was actively investigating whether there were additional victims, not just in Pennsylvania or Michigan, but possibly stretching back to his time near Ramstein Air Base in Germany. 4 confirmed names, 4 confirmed lives, and years of blank space that nobody has fully explained. The Calhoun County Sheriff's tip line remains active. If you knew Harold Holman during his Battle Creek years, if you knew Ashley Parlier, detectives still want to hear from you. December 14, 2022. Holman was extradited back to Michigan and arraigned in Calhoun County District Court on first-degree premeditated murder. He was 44 years old, already serving 2 consecutive life terms in Pennsylvania. February 1, 2023, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The original first-degree charge was amended as part of the agreement. He would serve 37.5 to 60 years in Michigan, stacked on top of what he was already serving. He would cooperate with the search for Ashley's remains. He has not been able to find her. April 10, 2023. The sentencing hearing. Nicole Campen walked into that courtroom carrying 18 years of everything, the searching, the counseling she had been in for over a decade, the loss of her parents, the loss of a nephew. Ashley never got to meet the loss of a wedding. Ashley never got to attend. The loss of every ordinary moment that a sister is supposed to be present for. She was not alone. Toshia Feaster, Tiana Phillips's older sister, was there. Emily Corbin, Erica Schultz's sister, was there. Harold Holman had spent 20 years operating in deliberate isolation, choosing victims who were alone, keeping his crimes separate, making sure nobody connected the dots. He had never intended to create any community around what he did. He had intended to leave nothing but silence. What he had actually done was forge a bond between 3 women that nothing could sever. Nicole and Toshia and Emily had met in person around Thanksgiving 2021. They had traveled to each other's states. They had held each other through court dates and anniversaries, and the particular grief of losing someone to violence and never getting a complete answer. He thought he was destroying separate lives. He accidentally created a sisterhood. Toshia Feaster looked out at the courtroom and said, "There are only two other girls in this entire world that know exactly how I feel. Knowing that I'm not alone gives me a little bit of comfort." Nicole stood up. She had waited 18 years for this moment. She had imagined it, dreaded it, prepared for it, and not prepared for it. And when she finally faced the man who killed her sister, she didn't collapse. She didn't break. She delivered every word with the steadiness of someone who had decided, long before she walked into that room, that he would not get to watch her fall apart. "You murdered my sister, but you killed so much more. You stole a piece of us every day since the day she went missing, until the day we all die." She described being psychologically tormented for 18 years, counseling for over a decade, watching her mother's Huntington's disease accelerate under the weight of grief, watching her father hollow out, missing her nephew's birth because Ashley wasn't there to share it, carrying her sister's absence into every room, every milestone, every ordinary Tuesday that somehow felt like a reminder. Then she turned and spoke directly to Ashley. "My sweet, naive sister didn't know you were evil. I have no doubt that she loved you and would have raised her child with so much love. There are days I swear I can hear the argument the two of you had, her pleading for you to step up and be a man and a father." When Hallman spoke, his own account of what he had done, he used the language of someone describing a mechanical failure. "I panicked and put her in the back of my car, drove her into a wooded area and put her there, and struck her a few times to make sure she wouldn't regain consciousness." Struck her a few times. That is how he described ending Ashley Parlier's life, her parents' 15 years of grief, Nicole's 18 years of searching. An unborn child, reduced to struck her a few times, a sequence of actions, clinical and detached, delivered by a man who has never once demonstrated that he understands the weight of what he removed from the world. The judge sentenced him to 37.5 to 60 years, to be served in a Pennsylvania state prison on top of 2 life sentences already running. Harold David Hallman III will die in prison. Ashley Parlier is still in that field. The farmland is gone. Private property now. New structures on old ground. The trees have grown taller, and the soil has settled, and the landscape has rearranged itself the way living things do over 20 years. Russell and Cherie Parlier are buried somewhere with the wrong kind of ending, a closed chapter that never actually closed, a goodbye to a daughter they never got to find. Nicole Campen is still here, still talking to detectives, still waiting. The Calhoun County Sheriff has never officially closed the search. Ashley Marie Parlier walked out into a world she believed was good and met a man who proved it wasn't. The land has changed, the trees have grown, and houses have risen on the ground where she was left. But somewhere in the silence of Newton Township, the girl who trusted everyone is still waiting to come home. Before you go, 3 questions worth sitting with. A German court released Harold Hallman after 3 years for a murder he committed because he wanted to know what it felt like. And he walked back into America with no meaningful criminal record transfer. Ashley Parlier paid for that gap with her life. When a justice system in one country releases a killer into the world, who carries the responsibility for what that killer does next? Hallman's wife Anne knew what he had done to Tiana Phillips. She saw the photographs. She went to the crime scene. She stayed silent for 2 years. What does it take? What kind of fear lives inside a person to carry that kind of knowledge and say nothing? Ashley's remains have never been found. Her family is still waiting. If you knew Harold Hallman during his years in Battle Creek, if you saw something, heard something, remember something that never quite sat right, that tip line is still open. Some cases don't end with a sentence. They end when she finally comes home.